Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you were watching after all that, then I have something in my throat. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. And also, if our first hour is general discussion about media and virtual production, second hour is usually we want to spend a little more time on something. And we are going to be here with Michael Kammes. Michael is the incredible expert in post-production in the cloud. And so he's going to be talking a little bit about that in the second hour and answering your stacking up questions. A lot of questions already coming in. So keep those questions flowing for Michael. And then we'll get to that in the second hour. Tomorrow, we normally have education, and we have an education of sorts. We're going to have the first hour is Q&A. Second hour and hours after that is going to be the launch. We're going to close down office hours. We're going to go over to into after hours for some of us, and then if you want to watch it on YouTube. But we're going to go to the office hours space launch. There's a whole bunch of people that are aggregating all around in Nevada, getting ready to fire off a 10 or 12 foot rocket. So it's going to be exciting. That starts at 8 o'clock. So after hours we'll start a little early so we can kind of watch the behind the scenes. So stay tuned for that. And then on Sunday, of course, is our more philosophical what are we doing here conversation, and we'll go from there. All right, let's jump into the questions. Mitch, what do we got?
And thank you, Alex. Andy Kokendorfer from Vieira, Florida asks, what ATEM improvements would you like to see at NAB this year?
Go ahead, Danny.
Well, at least a third HDMI out on the ATEM Extreme ISO, rather than be limited to two, because one, you always will need it for the multi-view, while the others will program out to the projector and whatnot. A third will be helpful so that you don't have to use a splitter. In most cases, a lot of people asking for, can we have a second program out while using the multi-view?
Yeah.
So,
no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Courtney?
Well, I would like to see on the Mini line to see them put in XLR inputs, even if they're Mini XLR in. So balanced line inputs with pretty good preamps would be a great plus, at least a pair of them. That would be wonderful.
Go, George.
I would love to see an update to the television studio. Obviously, super sources is a big deal for us right now, so I would love to see the update to that so we could get more access to super sources.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell. Oh, can't hear you, Mitchell.
Sorry, a power switch. And I'm with Courtney. Better audio inputs would be better than those little ginchy little mini plugs.
Yeah, a lot of hardware, a lot of production hardware doesn't have power switches because you're more likely to turn it off by accident than you are to need it. So that's usually the challenge there. I completely agree with the request. More outputs, XLR balanced inputs. I don't think that we'll see any of those, but I would love to see them. I think that what's more likely is they're going to fill the line out between the Extreme and the Constellation. There's a lot of stuff with a lot of old hardware without a lot of the new stuff, the new keyer, a lot of different things that they've added to the line, even to the Extremes and the Minis that aren't in the 4MEs and 2MEs and 1MEs. So I think that those are pretty ripe. I'm really hoping we see, for me, I'm really hoping we see finally an 8K camera to go with the 8K switcher and the 8K Hyperdeck. It would be nice after 2 years to have a camera that would actually feed that. There's very few things that are feeding 8K out right now, so it'd be great to see. Next question.
George Butters from Halifax, Nova Scotia. What paid Mac-based software would you use to replace OBS for video playback into Zoom webinars, and why?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I like MIDI on the Mac because it has these integrations with the Hyperdeck. And the new version, the latest one, has NDI integration. So when you fire off, let's say I use vMix, it'll actually trigger that playout as you take it. So I like MIDI.
I go, George.
I second on the MIDI. I just tested that and the guys could confirm that I push NDI. You could push it into NDI video and then pick it up in Zoom. So I just tested that to this platform here that worked. So I second MIDI for getting it into Zoom easily.
Yeah, you've got a couple options to look at. I mean, so there's, and also you want to think about key fill, and so MIDI is a great solution. There's also QLab is not a slightly more complex solution than MIDI. What's nice about MIDI is that it just does the thing, and it does that well. And then we use, because we have to we have a lot of other requirements like 10-bit and Dante and so on and so forth. We use Softrons on the air because it's a lot more expensive, but it gives us a lot more tools that you probably don't need immediately, but we need for the kind of shows that we do. So on the air, QLab, MIDI, also MemoLive will do an output and does a lot of other things. So if you want a multi-purpose thing that does those, MemoLive is what I've actually used in shows probably more than anything else when I'm not using our big hardware. So those are a couple of different options there. Next question.
Joaquin Matas from Imperial Valley, California. Hello, everyone. Forgive me for my ignorance as I just started utilizing AWS in my workflow. Is it possible to send a MediaLive channel to MediaConnect? I'm trying to get the SRT out as well as RTMP out of MediaLive and wondered if that would work.
I don't know how to. So I don't know an easy way to get out of MediaLive. And usually it's designed to go MediaConnect to MediaLive, not the other way around. But you should be able to. I think that you could potentially go into MediaConnect using one of the other, not SRT, but something else to go back into it. But I haven't actually tried that. Guy, do you have any idea about that? Yeah.
I was starting to mess with it right before the show, but it ran out of time. Just to double check.
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that that question. So because usually it goes the other direction as far as how that works. I mean, I think that you could potentially. Yeah, go ahead, George.
So it's worth some testing because I know I'm able to push from vMix down to MediaConnect. So I don't see why you wouldn't.
And what are you using to get to MediaConnect from vMix?
Well, in MediaConnect, you could actually. I can't remember all of it right now, but you could actually pick up the feed in vMix,
right?
From MediaConnect, because
right.
you're on the backbone of you're on the network, so it actually sees it on the network, so you're able to pick it up from MediaConnect.
Yeah, I am 99% sure this is possible, and not sure exactly how to do it. so we'll keep on researching. I'll ask some folks. Next question.
Joaquin is back. His question: my understanding is the S16 can only be linked to my X32 via AES-50, and this is inconvenient as I run a full-Dante audio system, and my X32 is usually 500 plus feet away from the rack. Can I convert AES-50 to single-mode fiber due to the long distance?
I actually don't think that'll work. I think you need to connect those directly. You can't put it anything that's going to convert it to a network. It's not going to work. But what you can do is put a Dante card into your X32. So that's literally when we buy an X32, I buy a Dante card immediately, so that I can connect my X32s via Dante network. So, but I don't think you can put it through fiber. You can't put it through a network or fiber. It has to be directly linked to the S16, as far as I know. Next question.
Nathan Cashin from Oregon City, Oregon. While walking through a space museum in Oregon, I heard a familiar voice. Did Bill Davis do the voiceover for the Space Shuttle Discovery simulator produced by Binary Star circa 2005?
He might have. I don't know. We don't know. Bill's not. You picked the one day that Bill's not here. Bill is on his way actually to see. Here's the irony of all of this is that Bill's going to see a rocket launch, so he can't talk about whether he did voiceovers for NASA. So yeah, go ahead, Mitchell. Can't hear you. We didn't hear you there. What did you say?
Oh, I'm sorry. I used to do the monorail at Disney World. Does that count?
Very good. Next question.
And the next question coming up from me. Just added a digital I/O card to my Neve 8801 mic processor. Because the digital output is mono, it only comes out of the left channel of the AES. Is this normal in the UK? I'm told the BBC does this.
So you're just talking about you have a mono track and it's only coming out of the left channel? Yeah, that is the standard way. If you have mono, what people expect is left track. So that's the standard that I grew up with. Yeah. Did you have something to add, Mitchell?
How do you get it back to monos if you want to monitor what you're doing and it's only coming out of your left ear?
Well, you're monitoring it through your left ear. You have to find some way to copy the left over to the right. So you'll have to have some piece of hardware that's going to let you duplicate it over. The cheapest thing is like a little 1-to-6 XLR converter, and you just pull it out and then put two of them into the other input, and then you're good to go. Like if
you can't do that in the digital domain.
Loopback. or something like that. I mean, you just need something that, or an X32 or anything else that you can take one channel, say this channel goes to these two channels. So
strangely, I was able to fix the problem by sending a word clock in and double sampling the input to 88.1, and it magically came on both channels. I don't know why, but it does. It works that way.
I don't have an answer for that. that's a random one, but it's designed to go out of the left channel there. Next question.
And it's from John Clark in London, England. And he wants to know, how do I watch what is going on with office hours in space?
Office hours in space. So we're going to go into after hours, and I don't know whether they're going to be able to feed us something or not directly into there, any kind of behind the scenes, but we'll watch it on YouTube. I think it's oh-space.com. We'll watch it over there, and we'll have kind of Mystery Science Theater over on our side. So, and we can decide, so we'll talk about it while we're watching it. Really excited about what the guys are working on. So we'll see how it turns out. Next question.
So you're saying Crow will be in the audience? Okay. Question from Hasmuk from Cape Town, South Africa. When bringing in meters, when I speak, the meters do not pick up any audio. Using Loopback and Audio Hijack, is this doable?
Yeah, it should be. I mean, the meters should, you should be able to pipe your own in through Loopback. So that should be the, I think that there's no reason that if it's not getting in there, then that means there's something missing in what it's picking up. But it's hard to tell from that piece. But if you're not hearing it when you're speaking, you can route almost any input into it and create a source out of Loopback and Hijack. You don't need Hijack, but you should always buy them together because eventually you will. Next question.
And it's from Paul Valus of Austin, Texas. Is Restream IO totally useless? I've been getting a lot of negativity about that from Alex and others on office hours.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I would say it's totally useless. We use it all the time just to check streams to make sure. So it's a great place to just fire up really quick to grab that RTMP and check and make sure that your stream's up. Since using the cloud now with AWS, instead of using Restream to actually push to multiple locations, we haven't been using it as a service any longer. So I could understand why some people, they've been burned. And so I like to just push direct instead of going through Restream, even though it can't do multiples. And I do like supporting those guys. They're in the Ukraine, and not to get political, but yeah, support those guys. They're good people.
Yeah, go George.
As Guy mentioned, I don't think it's totally useless. I tried to get it in November on Black Friday, but with services like Live Peer, which I'm testing now, you could actually build out your destinations. Also with Vimeo, you could do the same thing. Also with AWS, you could build out your own destinations. So it comes down to whether you want to invest in building out your own workflows or using something like Restream. It's going to work for some folks, and it's not going to work for others.
Yeah, the real challenge with working with a consumer, place that holds all of your streams is that if it goes down, you have very little to go to after that. So I think that anybody who's, the real problem is that if you have a service like Restream, you have to be up 100% of the time, not 99, not 95, 99.5, but 100% of the time. And that hasn't been what they were able to produce in the earlier days. So it may have gotten better, but a lot of us would have one out of every, 10 or 15 would have some kind of problem, that we had to deal with, and it wouldn't take the feed, it wouldn't send the feed, it wouldn't pass the feed correctly, it wouldn't, there's a bunch of things that it wasn't doing. I think that if you're just getting started, you want to go out to a bunch of endpoints. I think it's a relatively easy way to do it. The irony, of course, is that I primarily used Restream to stream into Russia. so that's why I know it, because it was the only thing that could get to VK, which is the Facebook version for Russia, or Russia's Facebook. And anyway, but it worked okay. But again, you have that issue. So I think that it's useful for some people, and especially if they're not technically minded. I will say that once you get something set up in AWS, you kind of don't know why you were doing something else, because it's not, you just kind of turn it on and it works and it just does the thing. And it's like a little tank. And so I think a lot of us have gotten used to that, and you can then create whatever you want. I think that's the big thing, is that Restream, you're going to be on the rails that it gives you. And it's the same thing that happens, like you can use there's lots of people, like left to my own devices, I'll build all my websites on Squarespace because I don't want to have to think about it. Like I just want it to work and I just want it to do the thing. And then, the next step up, people start using WordPress because they have a lot more control. So we're kind of in the it's kind of like you're asking, should we use Squarespace to a bunch of people who are using WordPress because they want more control and more. So I think that, but I definitely think there's a space for both of them. And we do want to support folks that are in Ukraine. So don't cancel right now because they need you. Next question.
From Fleety in Bali, Indonesia, Zoom has recently released another hybrid 4K camera, the Q8N 4K. It looks good for a cost-effective multi-camera podcast or in-person panel. Any thoughts on the image quality?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, it has a small sensor. I just looked it up, and I own the previous version of this, the HD version, and the image quality after you get used to large sensor cameras, it's just horrible in comparison. So it's rough. I mean, I know the price is only $399, but for that kind of money, I'd still be looking at like a GH4, Micro Four Thirds used camera and getting that large sensor look because it's phenomenal. The difference is astounding when you compare something like one of these older or newer Zooms. It's no comparison.
I really feel like 1 inch. 1 inch is the minimum size for a sensor that I want to use. And so I think that this is much lower than, I think is this the 1/2.6? I think it's 1/2.6.
1/2.3.
0.3, yeah. So it's a fair bit smaller than that, and you just can't get the quality that you want out of that size sensor, in my opinion. Like you just don't. I've never, haven't seen it. Maybe it's possible. I haven't seen it anywhere. You can get it on really well lit days outside or really well lit studios. Looks pretty good. It's when you get into anything that isn't really well lit that it falls apart really fast. Next question.
The Seventh Scroll in Brooklyn, New York. Morning, guys. We're looking for a mid-sized tripod for my Blackmagic 6K Pro with a video head when we're in the field. What would you guys suggest? Go ahead, Danny.
Well, budget is not stated here. I'll guess I'll start low. So you can use the Loopback THX system, which I have recommended to quite a handful of people to use the Blackmagic 6K Pro.
That's great. Courtney?
Sorry, perfect timing with the garbage crew outside. The lowest price, I think the best lower price tripods are, you can find the Manfrotto. The Nitrotech N8 is a pretty good little video head, and you can get that with a tripod and a built-in spreader for under $1,000. Once you jump up to the O'Connors or to the Sacklers, the Video 20, Video 17 from the Sackler or the O'Connors are all the way up to the 2575. You're multiplying that $1,000 by about 10 to get a good set of sticks and a decent fluid head.
Yeah, the ones that I felt like have been really good cost performance wise have been the Benros. Actually, the Benros are. I find that they're we've bought a lot of them in the last little bit of time. I don't know, maybe 20 of them, and of different sizes. Mostly some of the larger ones that are in the $400 or $500 range. There is just a touch of play on the pan in the head. Makes me a little crazy. So, but outside of that, I'm super happy. And then the tongue that comes in into the is a little bit of a tight fit. So those are the only things that I get challenged with the Benros. And if they fix those two things, I would probably use them for everything. but to Courtney's suggestion, some of the bigger heads, the reason you get those bigger heads is because of the pan quality. You get these big heavy heads with really nice friction, and you can get really nice smooth moves, and they also take a lot more weight. Next question.
I have a question. Are inner ear monitors required equipment for OH 2.0? And if so, what are you using?
Go ahead, Danny.
Well, I'm using the Linsol, the KZ series. Yes, in-ears or any headphones are always useful, especially if you need to have original sound on when you're on video conferencing.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Well, as an old guy, I'm glad this isn't a requirement. I use these bone conduction headsets from Shocks.
That's great. Go ahead, Courtney.
You know me, Mr. Cheap. I use these HYS in-ear monitors. Just plugs in. It comes with two different types of style of ear earbud that goes in the end there, and they're removable, and they're only about $10. You can get 2 of them for $19.95 on Amazon. So, and it sound. I had another one that looked the same but didn't sound quite as good. This one has pretty full quality, and I don't have any problems with it in my ear.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
I've got the Shure 215s. I'm finally getting used to them, and thanks to Mickey suggesting using the comfy foam inserts, I can sit here for a couple of hours and it's not a problem for me. But in addition to that, I just want to know, it seems like we're transitioning away from headsets altogether.
There'll be some point where we can't use them. I'm not saying it's right now. There'll be some point where over the years isn't going to work, for what we're doing. Now, go ahead, George.
I've been on audio elements since the beginning of office hours. They've worked great. I've had the same pair for 2 years now. So Alex turned me on to that. You could build out your kit. So that's easy. And you could also get molded in-ears if you wanted to, but audio elements.
Yeah, I have moved to the Linsoles, I'm pretty happy with them. There's a couple things that I like about them. One is the detail is there, so I can hear a lot. And so more than I was used to for in-ears. And then they're not very expensive. I think the ones I bought are like $50 or $60 or something in that range. So they're relatively inexpensive. The thick cable. So I was using some of the BubbleBees and I had some other ones and the cables were too thin and they get tangled up. These are really nice and thick. And so that when I take them off and put them back on, it's just that's easier. And I do that a lot. I'm probably in them. I probably have them in my ears, maybe 6 hours a day. So I'm kind of maybe more, 6 to 8 hours a day. And so because my wife runs other events, so we can't have open speakers anywhere. so that's another piece of that puzzle. Next question.
And it's from John Merrill in Phoenix, Arizona. I just bought a Brio. Instructions that came with it, even online, are not great. How do you know when you're in 4K mode? The Logitech Camera Settings app doesn't have a button to put it into 4K. What am I missing?
I don't think there is a 4K mode out of it. I think it's 1080p. It's just a 4K. It images 4K so that you can pan and scan inside of it at 1080p. But I don't think it actually outputs 4K. I think a lot of these 4K sensors are 4K, but they deliver 1080 to my knowledge. And I don't know if you'd even want it at 4K because it would be all the way wide. And I think the biggest problem with a lot of these is that the zoomed in mode for the Brio, for instance, is 65 degrees. I personally think that's where it should start. Like it should start at 65 or 70 degrees and then allow you to go in, closer if you want to. I think that the real problem with a lot of these is that the field of view is way too high, way too wide. So you don't really buy a lot from the Brio probably does it the best, but there's, because it only goes out to 90. But a lot of these ones, a lot of the other cameras are going out to 100, 110, 120 degrees, which means you're going to have to zoom in so far that you don't get the quality out of the camera. So I think Brio does it. That's one of the reasons I think Brio outperforms a lot of the other ones that are newer is because actually the lens on it has nothing to do with the sensor, but the lens isn't as wide as the other ones are. And I don't know why they're making them that wide because we're working from home. We don't want to show the whole office. I think that they're building this out but 90% of the population would want something that started at about 70, 75 at the most, and then let you zoom in from there at 4K. Be a much better solution. Next question.
And it's from Hasmuk in Cape Town, South Africa. Skin tone most challenging for 6K setup. Had overview lesson with Nigel on Omniscope. Used vector, waveform, false signal scopes. Explain briefly how ATEM controls affect each scope. Red dot, lift, gamma, waveform 0 to 100%, meaning?
I don't know if I'm set up to really walk someone through it during this hour, but I would put that in as a suggestion for a second hour, and then we'll just go through the whole ATEM color control piece by piece. We can do that in the next couple of weeks. So, yeah, go ahead, Mitchell. Can't hear you, Mitchell.
What are they referring to in lift?
Lift is, so on an ATEM, you have lift, you have gamma, and you have gain. The lift is the blacks. The gain is really the highlights, and the gain is that. The gamma is the midtones, or the midpoint. So as you move that up, you're moving the middle of your stack up and down. The lift is going to, if you want to raise your blacks or lower your blacks, and the gain is going to be raising and lowering your white point. And so those are the ones that you have there. I mean, the big thing with your skin is you do want a vector scope. The waveform is fine, but the vector scope is super valuable because it's got a little, when you look at it, when you look at a vector scope, you're going to have a vector scope, and you're going to have these little guys here like this, and you're going to see a little line like this, and skin tone, no matter how dark or light, will sit on that line. It's not a matter of how dark your skin is or how light your skin is. It will always, you will always want that. If you sit on that line, you'll be accurate. Now you might choose to be a little warm or a little cool over top of that, but if you hit that line, your skin is probably going to look pretty good, in that area. So, and when you're, by the way, with the vector here, it's obviously got colors that you're trying to hit, and then the further out it is, the more saturated it is. So in those colors. So, but we can definitely spend a whole second hour talking about not so much. We can talk about color correction, but we can really talk about how the ATEM does that. Would probably be useful, because I will say that it is a different kind of color correction than than we ever saw before. So when the ATEM came out, a lot of us were apoplectic. We were like, this is the dumbest interface I've ever seen. Where's my G minus R and R minus B and B minus R and B minus G? And that's what all of us color corrected our cameras with, and we just hated the interface for the ATEM. And now I would never want to go back. It is so much more powerful than all the old tools that we had to color correct before in the other cameras. And that's one of the reasons that I like ATEM cameras so much, is A, that I can load a LUT, and B, that the color correction through the switcher is so much more detailed and accurate than what I get from a standard broadcast camera. Next question.
And it's from Dave Odin in Johnstown, Colorado. What is the best low-cost power over Ethernet network switch to be used in a Dante system?
Go ahead, George.
So Netgear is leading the way and they have a great lineup. I'm going to post a link in the chat. Also, I'm using Ubiquiti in my setup here. And after contacting Autonet and also Brian Maddox, I've been able to clean up my Dante network. So Ubiquiti will give you some good choices also, but definitely Netgear.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, he just stole my answer. We both have the same Dream Machine from Ubiquiti, and we're running Dante on them, and they seem to be playing nicely with NDI. Typically, you would want to segment those, and that's what we've been seeing a lot of people getting with these Netgear, because the AV line makes it super simple. They already have these VLANs set up. So if you're looking at doing Dante, spend the extra couple $100 or whatever it is to take all that worry out of having these lines cross, so to speak. Because when you get these chatty networks, sometimes they could either make your audio drop out or your NDI signal drop out. So it's best to either learn how to do it or make it easy by just buying into a manufacturer that already has the presets done for you.
And these are the Netgear ones that are basically AV over IP, right? Those are the ones that you're...
They're just a regular switch. They just look like, it's 8-port. Like the bottom of the barrel one is the 8-port with 2 SFP modules, so you can put some 10Gs in there. But what you do is you actually have these presets that you say, I'm doing NDI, I'm doing Dante, or I'm doing both, and those are already pre-configured for you. So it takes a lot of that guesswork as far as jumbo frames, IGMP snooping, MDMS, all these little settings that in a regular work environment you want them on, but in other avenues you don't.
Right. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, there's a mini Netgear version I just bought. It's 8 ports on it. It's a managed switch, but there are 2 flavors. One is 60 watts and the other is 120. So I just go for the higher powered one.
Yep. And go ahead, George.
Yeah, once you build out the Ubiquiti VLAN, you just have to go in there and turn off all the, like Guy said, the snooping multicast. You just need to turn all of that off on the VLAN and make sure you keep all your Dante and audio on a VLAN, on the separate VLAN.
And Mitchell?
Yeah, sorry. The green settings on it, you definitely don't want those. I think Alex has pointed that out before, that it goes to sleep or turns itself off, and that will mess Dante up.
Yeah. And for our producers, we are ripping through these questions at record speed. So if you want to put more questions in, go ahead and throw them in, or otherwise we'll start slowing down and really chewing on these questions. Next question.
TJ Asher from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Has anyone seen the latest season of Drive to Survive on Netflix. It seems they're making a great use of Dolby Atmos. Curious to other panelists' thoughts on it.
I have not seen Drive to Survive. I don't even what is Drive? I don't even know what that show is. But I think that it's. I have to admit that I don't watch a lot of Netflix. Go ahead, George.
I think he's speaking of probably the new season of F1, which starts on Sunday, and everyone should check that out also because they have some new cars and they also have a whole new camera layout of how they have the cameras set up on the car, and it's pretty interesting. So I think he's talking about F1.
Yeah, it's really a funny thing. We mounted some cameras onto Mario Andretti's. He's got a dual seater that he now takes people on little joy rides at races. So when it's Indy cars, but he take you can basically beforehand spend $1,000 and get to sit in the back seat with Mario Andretti as he takes on like the Sonoma Raceway or something else. And we mic'd someone up and put a bunch of cameras. But what was amazing to me was that they just super glued them on they're like, oh, we're going to refinish this anyway. So like they're always like they update the cars. And so they didn't really care as much as I thought, because I was like, oh, we can't attach it to the car. And they're like, oh yeah, we can. And so it was kind of an amazing, I was surprised anyway. So they just used standard super glue to put them on, these little GoPros. Now I'm sure they're doing something more for the F1 transmissions and so on and so forth. But what I will say is that people think that when you watch these racers, people think that we thought that'd be a great interview with the person in the back seat with Mario Andretti, but it's just mostly a lot of screaming and swearing. like they've never quite seen that. So it's the wonders of live video. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is here with a question. He wants to know, a co-owner of a virtual venue that hosts a disability group I've attended for 14 years ejected me and banned me from the venue with no communication with either me or the group leader. In the professional production world, how would that be handled?
Generally just go somewhere else. I mean, there's not really, I mean, in the general production world, there's no, you just kind of try to avoid drama. You can try to make something turn the other way. You just end up digging yourself into a bigger hole typically. Go ahead, Courtney. Courtney,
even if it's a personal disagreement, I think in the professional world, if it's a paid position and you're removed from a production, let's say, right, and you're in a union, the only solution is to file a grievance with the union. The union will file a grievance for you with the production company and go to bat for you in representing them in any lawsuits to get any past. If you were knocked out of a job, they could collect salaries that you would have received and so on. If it's a personal disagreement and you're not covered under a union contract, your only alternative is to try and work it out privately with the person who is in control of the group.
Yeah.
And see if you can conform to whatever reason that they ejected you for, if you can conform to their guidelines or something. Maybe that's something that caused them to take action.
Yeah, working it out directly is the only way to do that. Like if you take it, you don't want to make it a thing. That's there's people feel like they can, making a thing publicly, just makes, for everybody else around you, around that person, it will scare them all. So that's always the hard thing, is that, you have to be careful of how you do that. Generally privately. I mean, every time I've been unhappy with a job, I just move somewhere else. I have to admit, I don't try to fix infrastructural issues with where I work. I just find another place to go. Next question.
Gordon Lake from Los Angeles, California. If I connect 4 Hyperdecks or PlayoutBees to an ATEM Mini, then use that Mini as a source to an ATEM Extreme, is there a way of triggering one of the Hyperdecks to play when I click on the Contribution Mini source from the Extreme?
Go ahead, George.
It'll take me a while to explain it here, but definitely with a Companion and a Stream Deck, you could tie all of that together and fire it off, and you'll be able to do that with a Stream Deck.
Yeah, absolutely. And anything that takes this, Stream Deck. Yeah, anything that will handle the Hyperdeck protocol should be able to be set to roll when cut to. Go ahead, Mitchell. Can't hear you. Got to work on that button.
I believe the Hyperdeck protocol works over the Ethernet anyhow, so as long as it's on the same network.
Right. As long as it's on the same network and you set the IP, and then anything that's anything that follows that protocol, like anything that says it's hyper. So you have PlayoutBees, you have Hyperdecks, MIDI, Softron, all of those handle the Hyperdeck protocol. And when they say that, that generally means that if you set it up with the IP in the switcher, it should go over and start play, I believe. So that's the main reason. Otherwise, you don't need the protocol. So next question.
Jason Panks from Nashville, Tennessee. Any suggestions for iPhone 13 Pro add-on lens with 3 to 5 times zoom?
Yeah, I have one for the last version of it, but I can't. Let's see if I can find it really quickly for you here. The add-on lenses are actually really cool. So there's lenses that you can add onto your phone. It's a case typically. So the one that I used in the past for the 12s, I had a bunch of these, was called the US Key Vision multi-lens phone case. So US Key Vision, and it had macro, and it had some wider angle lenses and some 2x lenses. And what I liked about it was an actual case for the phone that let you add those. And I was amazed at the kind of quality that I actually got out of those. They're great. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, another one, you might want to look at something like the smartphone optics adapter that'll actually let you use binoculars or a scope. And if you have good optics, like, gosh, I can't even remember the name. Swarovski, I think was the name of the really expensive binoculars. I was looking at buying a pair when I was getting into the birding thing. But yeah, if you want to get really high quality, get good optics to start with, or borrow some or rent some, and then hook on one of these adapters, and then your smartphone just has to. There's little tweaks, so you actually turn knobs to move and fine tune the phone so that it can focus on what your eye would normally be focusing on in the binocular or in the scope.
Now go ahead, Tom.
Well, I've used the Moment lenses in the past, but I'll tell you, the best case in the world is this small rig actually adapts the Moment lenses, and then you've got all the extra quarter 20, cold shoes, everything else that you can do, the handles, you name it, and it's available for the 13 Pro right here.
The smoke that you're smelling is my pocket. My wallet is like catching fire.
This is not an Alex. This is $39.
Wow. Okay. And can you put two of them together? Like, could you put two of the cases? Could you mount them so that they be right next to each other?
Well, if you took that little adapter that works with the NAND lights, the double-ended quarter 20, you'd have to upside down it. But
yeah. Well, that's the whole thing that I got to figure out. Yeah. So I've actually printed them, but to do, I've actually done some stereo photography where I take two iPhones and I swap them so that the two lenses are. It turns out if you put those lenses put the cameras right next to each other, the lenses are actually at interocular distance, and so interesting. Yeah, that's really cool. So that's small. You say that was a small rig?
Small rig, yes.
Small rig. That's great. Next question.
Cool. Douglas Carmichael is here. Do you see a difference in the quality of work from animators trained in traditional techniques versus animators who started on the computer?
Great, Courtney.
Well, I think it depends. I think the old school animators, the Disney animators that were 2D animation, were all doing keyframes, and all the in-betweens were being done by, a group of people overseas usually. And nowadays the in-betweens are done by computer, and coloring is handled more easily than cell animation. But I think as far as the animation techniques themselves, the ability to stretch and warp and disobey the laws of physics in 2D animation was part of what gave all the old Warner Brothers animated characters their life and gave them such caricature. And that's harder to do if you're starting with a 3D based animation. That you can do it, of course, but it takes a lot more. It's not necessarily built into the software, and it all comes from the idea, the head of the animator originally. And now a lot of that, the physics and all that stuff can now be built into the computer animated stuff, so that you can let the computer handle all the tough physics questions like sliding in and things falling at the rate of deceleration of gravity and so on, and bouncing and things like that.
In the 90s, I will say that you absolutely saw a difference between traditionally trained animators. Most of like 60% of the animators at ILM, I think when I was there, came out of the Sheridan School in out of Canada, and they were, they really were this kind of craftsman's training on how to put that together. And there was a part of that, and I think Ringling still does it as well. I think at some point it got to a point that we don't see a lot of difference. I think a lot of people who go through an animation course will learn some cell animation just because it's kind of the tradition of understanding like where we came from, but usually that's like a term, and you can definitely do that on your own. I think that the vast majority of animators that I see now barely understand how cell animation works. Like they live in a different world, and a lot of it has to do with also the part of it is you had to visualize a lot more in the 90s than you do now. Now you can watch what you're doing in real time. You can play it back immediately. Back then, you had to like hit a button in wireframe and wait for it to queue up, like while you were working on it. It wasn't in Softimage back then. It was a thing. So it's definitely come a long way, and I think it's a lot easier. And I think that most animators that are there spend very little time in any kind of traditional background. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I agree with Alex. It was interesting back in the early 90s. I was doing my radio show from the MGM studios in Disney World, and I was interviewing one of the animators for Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And he was just sitting there, and he had a pad of paper that was just sitting on the table that I kept notes on. And he just pulled it over, and he just started scribbling and doing stuff, and I didn't really pay much attention to it. And when I finished the interview, I looked over. He had a whole animation sequence done just because the paper was there, and he did it. It wasn't because there was a computer there, because there was, but the what's going on in the head of an animator, he just can't help himself. They see that paper, and they're already visualizing it, and now they transfer it. It just came naturally to them.
Yeah, the thing is what's really important is that attention to detail. It's all these little understanding those things. I'm going to try to bring Steve Williams on at some point. I mean, he's an old friend from ILM, and there's a new documentary about him called Spaz that I just saw go by, and that was his nickname when we were at ILM, and I don't know if he can do a clean show. I don't know if that's in Steve's repertoire. So anyway, but he's probably one of back then he's the one that did the original Tyrannosaurus Rex animation. And what's funny is people will post stuff to LinkedIn, and every once in a while, you'll see Steve just drop in and go, the heel is dragging just a little too much for the weight. And it'll just, but that's the kind of like incredible attention of what the body's doing, like to give it that little, and he'll drop these little tips. Anyway, he's a really interesting guy to hear, but I'm looking forward to it. I think we're going to play the documentary in our little theater soon. So hopefully we'll get to see it, and we'll talk more about it, see if we can get him on. Next question.
Dave Oden from Johnstown, Colorado. Is there a way to get macOS on a Mac Mini M1 to see a Decklink Duo 2 capture card in a PCI expansion box so you can present from PowerPoint or Keynote?
Go ahead, George.
So I took my hands off for this question a little while ago, and I came back again. So yes, the Mac Mini will see a Decklink Duo card. You just have to go into the advanced setting and set it up. But if you were asking, can you output PowerPoint or Keynote, you would then need to get like a Blackmagic monitor and just attach it to the Decklink SDI out, and you should be able to push Keynote or PowerPoint out of that. But I'm not sure if you're asking, can you ingest or go out?
Yeah, I think the issue is to get, if you want to present from those, they will not naturally see a decklink from that. You need to use something that's going to allow you to do siphon, and specifically with this Black Siphon. So what Black Siphon goes out to the Blackmagic cards, and that's what we use for this show. What you're seeing me through in this show right now is all the ISOs are using Black Siphon to get out of Zoom ISO into the Blackmagic card, but something has to be able to grab those frames and put them on the card. It's not naturally seen as a display out, which is what these require. I do think that is the next big thing for Keynote. I don't know about PowerPoint, but for Keynote, one of the next big things is being able to handle virtual cameras more effectively. Next question.
Next question comes from Chad Lafarge from Columbia, Missouri. Looks like I'm going to need to get Mac Minis for my kids. When is the right time to buy?
Courtney?
Right after they announce new ones, buy the last version models, especially for your kids. You don't necessarily want your kids working with the latest and greatest necessarily, unless it would hold them back in their studies or something. But I would always start buying with the previous year's model right after they announced a new one, and that way you can get a good deal on them. And and a lot of people will be unloading their old ones, so you can find them a lot on the used market when the new models come out.
Yeah, I would probably wait until after. If I was going to buy them, I'd probably buy them after WWDC. Just to make sure that nothing is going to get updated. I would not expect to see another update for months, 6 months after that. So I'd be very surprised if you get to WWDC. That's probably the best time. The reality is that your kids are going to have a hard time stretching the current ones if they're just getting started. They're pretty powerful. So for the price, so I wouldn't. I mean, I've got lots of them. So they do a pretty good job if you're not going to go into a higher price point. Next question.
John Snyder from Reno, Nevada. I have a Behringer Flow 8, and I'm trying to use the monitor out signal as an input for a second PC. The cables I've tried so far picked up a lot of background noise. Is this a terrible idea, or any suggestions for diagnosing?
The reason that that's a problem is because they're unbalanced. So unbalanced is basically, the cable becomes an antenna. It picks up everything around it. So what you're missing, the only really way to do this is to convert that back using some kind of, you want to use something that's going to convert the 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch out back into balanced, and then have balanced inputs on the other side. Even that may pick up some noise, but the longer that cable runs, the more noise it's going to pick up. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and if you're going directly into a second PC, most of the inputs on most PCs are non-balanced anyway. They're a little mini jack anyway. What you might have to do, the headphone output is a low impedance output usually. So it's designed to drive 8 ohm or 4 ohm headphones. And your input is at 10,000 ohms. So you might need to put a little resistor network in there to knock the signal down. That'll knock the noise down as well when you go into your unbalanced line input on your second PC. But like Alex said, probably the best solution would be to come out and go into some type of transformer balanced converter that goes from unbalanced to balanced, and then go into a mixer or something else that's plugged into a USB input on the second PC that can take a balanced input.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, taking that just a little bit further, Courtney, a Henry Matchbox will do that for you. It's an I/O. It'll go both ways from professional to consumer level. RDL makes one. Art makes one. You can probably find them. They don't necessarily have to be transformer, but if it's got Jensen transformers in it, it's a really good box.
The ones that we've used the most, because usually we don't expect to have great audio coming out of something once we go to 1/8 inch jack. But the ones we've used the most are the Whirlwind Pod DIs, or have been the ones that, there's an 1/8 inch jack in. It has a ground lift built into it if you need that. It's got a low Z XLR out, and then what I would do in the PC is get a card that had an XLR in or balanced in. It doesn't have to be XLR; it could be 1/4 inch balanced in, because the 1/4 inch will fit inside the PCI slot. Next question.
From Elias Prunen of Ontario, Canada. Where do you see virtual event platforms like EventMobi, Hopin going? It feels like there's a push for DIY and virtual hybrid events right now. Or is Zoom going to win it all with webinars and events?
Go ahead, George.
I'm just going to share with you my experiences over the past couple of weeks. Virtual event platforms are very problematic. The reason a lot of associations that I'm a part of or clients that I work for have to use them is because they want to be able, their base to be able to come back and see that content later on. And what these platforms offer is a way to go back and rewatch this content later on. Will Zoom win? Yes, because once Zoom gets to the point, or once we as producers get to a point, we could show clients how they could build out a back end to watch these things, their content later, it'll be beneficial for them. But I think I find it hard I can tell you right now that just streaming to these platforms is so problematic. So I think Zoom is going to win in the end.
The problem really is that when they get built, they're pouring concrete into something we don't necessarily need anymore. I mean, most of these platforms are somehow trying to reproduce the feeling of being in a real world experience or whatever, and that's just very limiting. A very limited way of looking at it. So it's a mixture of the misguided nature of most of these platforms, as well as the hyper focus that Zoom now has after the acquisition of Liminal. And I'll keep on coming back to that, because if you ask that question and Liminal was not part of Zoom, I would say, I don't know. I don't know how this is going to go, because I think most of Zoom's, event platform stuff, to be honest, has been, it's okay. It's not great. Having real production people who've actually worked deeply in that, now having some influence on that process, I think is a dramatically different thing, and we have to, you have to understand that, things get done by single people or a small group of people, like things that matter in most of these big companies get done by people who are given the responsibilities necessary to execute, and you just stay out of their way. And I worked in many, many large companies, and they are slow moving. They're kind of lumbering. They don't really have any direction. They have lots of politics. And inside of those companies are small teams of 4 or 5 people, sometimes as many as 30, that are just operating and executing and producing things and pushing things out and kind of left to their own devices. And I feel like if Zoom gives Liminal that backing, nobody can beat them. There's no way it's going to turn out for anybody else, because they hired the right people. Go ahead, George.
I think it's extremely tragic to watch these. If you look at the interface we're using here, and still see in 2022 an interface where a platform is using these little bubble heads on a theater and then just put in a window for you to watch, I think is just extremely tragic, I will call it.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, we have a webinar that's going on right now for a nonprofit. There's 272 people in there and haven't done this event in person. And these are heavy hitters, senators, mayors of the towns here locally. And I'm sitting there looking at it going, man, I wish I had the budget to push out what Blue's doing in Grant, where we can put these people in breakout rooms so they could still mingle, because a lot of business got done in the hallways and the parking lots. And I think that's what we're missing with a lot of these platforms, is that ability to cruise around the hallways and go meet and interact. So there needs to be a way that's easy beyond us doing this in the cloud with all these instances to push out and make stages. And I mean, part of it's just webinars with breakout rooms. I mean, that would be super helpful. And we were promised that November of 2020. So, I mean, we're a little behind schedule.
I think a rebuild of the entire breakout system is probably in what needs to happen for how that works. It's just very cumbersome. But the thing that I think will make the most difference is the SDK. So when the API will be powerful, but the SDK means that we can design anything, and when that happens, I think that it becomes the basis of many event solutions. Next question.
Simon Rea from Shrewsbury, UK. If you're showing a podium speaker, would you have them center frame even if there was also a sign language interpreter? If adding an interpreter to the footage in post, would you reframe where practical?
Go ahead, George.
So if it's a live event, I would try to frame and there's an interpreter. Obviously, you want to put the speaker on the left side of the frame so you can make room for that interpreter on the right. If you're going to do it in post, I would actually shoot the podium a little bit loose, because in order to reframe that, you're going to need the room. So that's what I would suggest.
In almost everything that we've done I've done a lot of interpreter work. The people who are watching it are pretty sensitive to where you put that and exactly how big it is. It's like a third of the screen. It's on the right. It's in the center. And the person has to be framed, obviously, waist to head, so that it's wide enough for everything to do everything they can do. I think that Apple does it the best, which is that they don't try to make it work for everybody. They do a full screen, and then they have a link to another one that is dedicated to that. So you have a program that is shot exactly the way it needs to be shot, and then you have another feed that is got the interpreter in it. and both of those are clearly available to folks. I think that's a much better solution than trying to make it work for everyone. I think that it just doesn't work for. I mean, it kind of it making everybody do something that they don't want to do, like, because you have 99% of the population isn't looking at that. So you want to have something that they just watch full screen, and then you want to have something else that is perfectly framed for the folks that need it, rather than trying to figure out what corner you're going to put them in. Next question.
And it's from Vincent Alvarez in Bellingham, Washington. He's watching NASCAR. The signal from cars kept cutting out. The screen would show tiny vertical multicolor stripes. Is that the equivalent to NTSC horizontal scanning? I thought digital was full screen at a time. Where are the vertical stripes coming from?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
In the old days, I would have said it's the ignition noise, but there is a lot of stuff going on between a NASCAR vehicle and the pits. So you got interference of some kind.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and it depends on what kind of encoders they're using, and whether they're row column encoders that are encoding it. That could be where the noise is getting in, or it could be in the compression codec that is compressing it to transmit it to their receiver that is losing bits somewhere, and as a result, the artifacts end up being vertical lines as information drops out. So it's impossible to tell exactly where that's coming from.
Picking up signals from cars going 200 miles an hour turns out to be really complicated over a very large track. We did it at the Sonoma Raceway, which is about 10 minutes away from my house, and it was a lot of setup, to make that work. We worked with a company called 3G Wireless. My guess is they weren't using 3G Wireless because theirs is pretty solid, or they didn't get enough time to set up. Next question.
And it's from Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Changing bit rates or resolution of Zoom rooms, not Zoom ISO, is problematic recording NDI ISO video into vMix or Studio Monitor. The result is the creation of new video files for every fluctuation. What NDI recorder will enable a single ISO recording?
You stumped us. I don't know. I mean, I would like my answer would be an SDI output that out of a card that forces it into a resolution and then back into NDI. But I don't know. I don't know how to do that in software. Yeah, well, there's nobody else does either. We get stumped every once in a while. This is one of them. Next question. Oh, we already saw that one. Next question.
Yeah, let's move on to the next one. And that question is from Douglas Carmichael. Has anyone used the DaVinci Resolve keyboards with the built-in jog wheel?
I think some of us got them. I don't use a lot of hardware, with Resolve. Just you get used to the keyboard, and I don't like using external pieces of hardware for the most part. Now I admit that I'm not a day in day out Resolve user, so maybe it'd be more valuable for someone like that. But for me, I want to be able to sit down at any computer and not get confused and not know where my fingers should go. So I try to drive that. I try not to even change to custom keys because I don't want to. I want to stay generalized so that any computer I sit down at, I can move quickly. Next question.
And it's from Douglas Carmichael again. What audio console would you prefer for theater use on a low, medium budget?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Not Digico or Midas, but I would go with a Presonus, something simple, something easy. I used to go with the Mackies, but things have changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead, George.
X32 is pretty affordable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do X32 or Q01 are the two that I know the best as far as what we've had owned lots of those. Next question.
And it's from Douglas Carmichael. What causes the lower thirds to occasionally stutter?
I think that has to do with the auto switching. So there is occasions that we're letting it auto switch. That basically it's the system, the machine, Office Hours 2.0 software is automatically switching between two people. And right now we're using Zoom's auto switching, or we have been, and using that queue, and it's too twitchy. So what it does is if it sees any noise at all, it's going to automatically switch to the other person and then back, and that becomes very. I think it confuses the system as far as how that bounces back and forth, and so we're working on dampening that a bit. I think we should get rid of following Zoom's auto switch altogether. So we'll see. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, if somebody has a short name and you say, go ahead, Mitch, or something like that, it's an awful lot to expect the thing to switch at you and then come back again to me.
Right. And fundamentally, it shouldn't do that. That's why we want to have our own control over the attack and decay, is because we want it to have more, we want to be able to control that dampening, and so that's and allow it to kind of form an L cut there. So that's one of the big things we did when we did, we built tools that controlled the Hangouts, Google Hangouts. And what the first thing that we did was took over the attack and decay and ignored the cloud, like ignored the machine, because the machine is too twitchy to make that happen. The only time we turned over that to the machine was right at the very end when everyone's laughing and stuff like that. It bouncing back and forth was a kind of a pleasurable thing to watch. It just felt really warm and fun, and it was something that you couldn't do as an editor. And so we let it run there. But for the most part, we took it over. So that's what we should do here. All right. We are now jumping into our second hour, and I'd like to welcome Michael Kammes. Hey, Michael.
Hello, all you beautiful people.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Yeah.
And Mitchell, your voice is golden. I wish I had those pipes. That's wonderful.
We do have a
Thank
high
you,
proportion.
Michael. My pipes are available if you should need them.
Thank you.
So Michael has been kind enough to join us to talk about posts in the cloud. Michael, can you give us a bit of your background?
Sure. I've been at a company called Bebop Technology for the past 3 years, a little over 3 years. The company's been around 6 years. And before that, I was the director of technology at Keynote Media, which is an integrator and reseller. It was in LA and now it's national. There's offices all around. But I still like to think of myself as a Chicagoan. I'm from the Chicagoland area, went to college in Chicago and moved out here about 14 years ago. My degree was in post-production. I went to college to be a director and I realized I had no talent. And so I decided to be a picture editor and I realized I had no talent. Then I tried audio and that seemed to work. So I was an audio guy for many years before I realized I didn't want people looking at the back of my head from a couch yelling at me on, move that effect one frame. So I decided to start building systems and integrating and training. And now I'm just a blowhard that talks about technology all the time.
and it seems like recently most of the technology you've been talking about is post.
Definitely. Yeah. I've always been too impatient for production. So moving to post was something that I could be a perfectionist about, and that kind of fit my mentality.
And you have now, in your company's Bebop, is that correct?
Correct. I work for Bebop Technology. Mm-hmm.
And what does Bebop do?
Bebop is virtualized post-production in the cloud. So obviously spinning up workstations that you work off of, but also giving you fast shared storage, giving you ways to review and approve in real time or asynchronously if you want to, giving various collaboration tools, being able to bring people on and off from anywhere in the world. So it kind of builds off the kind of base model methodology of let's spin up a workstation, but add all the collaboration tools that we've lost since we're no longer in the same building.
And what are the biggest challenges with production in the cloud?
Well, cost. And that's because a majority of it, we are kind of strangled by the AWSs and Azures and GCPs. You'll probably hear me use the acronym CSP a lot. That's a cloud service provider. Think of like ISPs in the 90s, right? Your internet service provider. So quite often we have to rely on what the big CSPs have available and what their cost is. And I think there's also some things that are also prevent other people from using the cloud. I think there's a lot of the religious zealots for macOS versus Windows, and the fact that macOS in the cloud is very difficult right now and not very inexpensive. And I think there also has to be the ROI model, right? If companies have already purchased new gear 3 years ago,
right,
they haven't deprecated or depreciated it out yet to the point where, okay, we can get rid of it and use the cloud. But then there's also the concept of why are we paying these insane rates for real estate in California when we can say, look, everyone go home. We'll just use that money in the cloud and everyone will be happy.
Right. And what do you think are the big advantages? So we talked about that, like why would you talked a little bit about it so far, but why would you really do this? Why should companies move to the cloud?
Infinite scalability. You don't have to ride out that 10-year-old Windows machine, that old Z800. You don't have to ride that out any longer. The fact that data centers are routinely upgrading their hardware, the fact that you can bring on more people without having to increase your real estate footprint, right? That's always easy. The fact that you no longer are relegated to who's within driving distance of the office. The fact that everyone can use shared storage, even if you are around the world, you're not shuttling drives, you're not uploading with Dropbox or something like that. You have instant shared storage. And I think a lot of this is the fact that you get a better home life experience, which is people can start working at 8 in the morning if that's better, or start working at 10 in the morning if that's better, and work around what else is going in their household with their partner or their child. So I think those are probably some of the biggest points on working in the cloud.
Are there certain areas of the production world that are going faster to the cloud than others?
Definitely. And that I always hate to break that news to people, because it's not an automatic, what we call lift and shift, where you just take what you're doing on the cloud or take what you're doing on prem and put it in the cloud. Editorial, obviously, that works very well. VFX, that works well. The kind of the media management, transcoding, that works real well. What still is kind of in its infancy in the nascent stages is high-end color grading. And yes, there are solutions. You can run Resolve in the cloud. You can run other applications in the cloud. But as you focused on a lot last hour, I was looking a lot at you, George, what is NDI? Right? How do you get a baseband feed from the cloud to a high-end color monitor locally, given the pipes that our internet's on? And everything is being compressed down to 422. Even if you have a fast fiber connection, you're still dealing with a compressed image as opposed to a pristine image. So that's kind of difficult for high-end color grade. There also really isn't a way to do multi-track sample accurate audio. For example, the 800-pound gorilla is Pro Tools, right? Mm-hmm. That's what I made my living on for over a decade. Pro Tools isn't even sanctioned to run in the cloud, right? Avid doesn't even make that possible. And if you can imagine that when you're dealing with audio in an NLE, you're running at what, 48K, right? But think about 48,000 samples compared to 24, 25, 30, 50, 60 frames, right? That's a lot. So trying to get sample accurate when you're trying to notch out that frequency, that's really difficult. I mean, heck, if you were to buy Pro Tools now, you can buy DSP cards. I'm showing my age with DSP cards, but you can buy their hardware, which will allow you to reduce latency on your local system. You can't do that in the cloud, let alone the latency of the geographical distance. So audio, sample accurate, 5.1 surround, that's still very in the early stages.
What are 5 things? You have 5 things in your name. What does that mean?
I've worked for integrators and resellers for almost 15 years before I came to Bebop. And what I always struggled with was, let's get below the talking points. Let's get beneath the it's shiny. Let's get beneath the hey, the warranty is newer. Let's get to what it really does. What are the pitfalls? What works and what doesn't? What's the cost? The real world, hey, let's go have a drink and I want to tell you about this product. And it's not meant to talk junk about any product, but here are the real world pros and cons. And the integrator I worked for understood that, there is there's a difference between marketing and reality. And that I wanted to do a web series where I talked about 5 things about a product or a concept or a workflow or a philosophy, so the greater populace could have technical education. And so that's been a series I've done for years. I've been on a hiatus for a couple of years for a multitude of reasons, but it's going to be coming back. I should have a new episode the next month, and I'm looking forward to getting back on the being in front of the camera horse, so to speak.
What do you see in the post-production world beyond cloud? What do you see are the big trends? Like, what are you tracking right now? Resolution, color depth, or just general aspects?
What I love is that, and I don't want to say Blackmagic has done this single-handedly, but I think there's a greater understanding, or at least attempt at understanding, for color science. I think traditionally we were doing color in Avid Symphony, right? You were finishing in Symphony. You had one person who had the magic eye and they did it and it was done. But now that color grading is affordable, I think more folks are looking into okay, how do I do this? And now that we have more than just Rec 709, we're getting different skill sets in those particular realms for color. And so I'm thrilled to see that people are now sitting up and paying attention to that. Go ahead.
Well, and I was going to say that I think that part of it is that they put out a product that is free that gives you pretty high-end color tools, so that you actually, most people just didn't even see that stuff before, right?
Exactly. Now, obviously, and one of the things I try and do with 5 things is do technical education, and so with more tech comes more responsibility. So I think there's a greater learning curve for color. So I think that's one thing I've seen. Obviously, the move to trying to edit with native codecs. I think we're finally seeing a little bit more of a balance of camera manufacturers saying, well, yeah, we can't expect you to transcode everything. So I'm seeing just a little bit of uptick in that. The fact that storage prices have come down means, hey, we can shoot ProRes, we can edit in ProRes, and everything is just smooth sailing. So those are kind of the things I've been seeing as of late.
And do you see the industry kind of leaning more and more towards ProRes as far as a kind of the format that they're working, the work format?
Yeah, and I really don't know how to feel about that, given the fact that it's a closed ecosystem, right? To some extent, the fact that if I believe ProRes isn't a SMPTE standard, I think that kind of rubs me the wrong way, so to speak. But I also understand, I can't look at like DNX HD or DNX HR and say, well, we'll use that because that's a SMPTE standard, because that's made by one company too. So, I'm a little on the fence about it, but it works great. And there's so many devices now that can do it in hardware. The fact that Windows now can encode into ProRes, where for years it couldn't. So yeah, I change from day to day on how I feel about that being the standard.
Now, I know we talked about I know we're going to talk about the cloud, but when you look at the Apple hardware coming out right now, do you think it has a significant impact on post-production?
Definitely. I was eyeballing the studio the other day. Now, I won't be picking one up because I just dropped a pretty penny on the brand new 16-inch MacBook Pro about 4 or 5 months ago. But yes, I think that's going to help incredibly. And what I'm really anxious to see is a greater offering for GPUs. And I don't mean for Apple, because Apple's obviously going to have GPU on chip, but the fact that we're not stuck on NVIDIA or AMD. I like seeing the fact that other people, other technology providers are branching into that, because A, the cost is just so high, and B, the availability and supply chain. So I'm very happy that Apple has introduced their own GPU into the M1 family. And I'm anxious to try it, even though I probably won't buy one anytime soon.
I was glad, it was killing me because when the MacBook Pro came out and it had the ProRes chips in it, I was like, I'm not going to buy it because I need that money to buy whatever comes next in the desktop. And so I'm waiting for my studio to arrive.
being kind of a tinkerer and nerd, I am bummed that my Hackintosh that I have here on my right doesn't have much life left because of the new architecture. It's becoming increasingly more difficult to emulate it. And I think there also comes a point in time where every technologist says, I don't have enough time of the day to troubleshoot 20 different technical things every day. I need to kind of pick and choose my battles. And I don't think I want to fight with a Hackintosh anymore. Yeah,
absolutely. We've got a ton of questions stacking up. If you've got questions for Michael, go ahead and throw those in. It's an incredible resource that we have here this morning. So let's go ahead and jump into the questions, Mitch.
Sure. We got a question from George E. Kennedy Jr. in Washington. Michael, during the past 2 years of the pandemic, did you see editors taking advantage of a cloud workflow?
Definitely. But we should probably clarify what that means, right? Because the cloud for most of us has been a way to transport things, right? Whether it be 50-year-old FTP, or whether it be using Dropbox, or whether it being WeTransfer or a P2P syncing technology, that's been in place for a while. So I think what you're asking, George, and you can point at me and say no if I'm wrong, is people actually editing in the cloud, doing post-production in the cloud. And that coupled with not only doing post-production in the cloud, but maybe working at home while remoting into a system that's back at the office. The latter Definitely. As we all know about technology, no one jumps in head first and drops 6 or 7 figures. They're going to hit the path of least resistance. So on that Thursday, 2 years ago, when everyone was sent home, the easiest thing was everyone go home, remote in, we'll open a port through the firewall. Hopefully they had their firewall. Hopefully they had a firewall, and they let people in to access their workstations. And that worked to some extent. But what they didn't take into account is their infrastructure was never structured to handle 5, 10, 100 people remoting in. Their contracts with the studios didn't permit things to leave premises, and technically you were streaming an image from on premises. What they also didn't realize is not everyone had a great home connection, right? People are using inexpensive internet connections. They have children who are doing distance learning. They have a partner who's doing a Zoom call, and there's not enough bandwidth, and they're working remote. Okay, now we're dealing with, does the workstation run your local laptop run the protocol that's needed to get into the workstation that is back at the office? So there's all these things which made things very difficult. So George, yes, there were a lot of issues with that, but most people overcame it. They used things like RGS by HP, which was their screen sharing protocol. I think a lot of folks realized very quickly that bad protocols killed your workflow. So things like TeamViewer, right? Things like Apple Remote Desktop, things like Microsoft Remote Desktop, those were garbage. They're meant for IT, right? So folks started using Teradici and Jump and Parsec, which are fantastic. But the next stage from that, as the second wave came and as we went into year 2, was, okay, you know what? Our creatives and our team have gotten used to working remote. And you know what? We're still cranking out product. We're still meeting payroll. Do we keep this expensive real estate footprint, or do we say, why don't we take that money and spend it on month-to-month costs in the cloud? So a lot of folks started moving to that. What made it a little bit more difficult was that there are some closed ecosystems like Avid, right? I'm a fan of Avid. I don't bleed blue or bleed purple by any stretch, but there's some great people over there. But the expense incurred would be several $1,000s to work remotely per user per month, and that was just too much for a lot of companies to handle. So over the past year or so, those prices have dropped, and so while there is a lot more people in the cloud, let me rephrase that. Because prices have dropped, there are a lot more people adopting the concept of working with machines in the cloud for their entire workflow. So that was a long-winded answer, George. I hope I got what you were looking for.
Did you have anything else, George?
You pretty much answered it. I was just, a lot of, and I'm not talking about the major companies. I'm talking about editors. I'm not a full-time editor, but editors that I know, freelancers, got stuck or couldn't work anymore because those projects went away. So as we move forward, another pandemic will happen. I don't know what will happen in my lifetime, but are we going to be prepared? Or are the average freelance editor going to be prepared to jump to the cloud with the cost of it?
Yes, but there's an asterisk to that. And what I mean by that is, if you're a freelance editor and you're being hired by a production, that production already has to have a cloud workflow. A freelance editor is not going to be able to walk in and say, oh no, I'm not going to follow what your editing paradigm is. I'm going to work in the cloud. No, we're not hiring you, right? So it doesn't work that way. The tail doesn't wag the dog. So the production or the facility has to say, we're in the cloud. We'll get you a subscription. You then can use things in the cloud all day long. So for the individual editor, that's how it's going to be. For what we call like pop-up facilities, someone goes in and gets a small VFX job. They need 10 people to work, 40 hours a week for the next couple of months to do VFX for something. That gives a great business opportunity to say, look, I don't need to four-wall somewhere. I can spin up and contract, expand 4 people for this one project and then spin things down. And then I'm not incurring that monthly cost. So again, it's going to be downwind of the facilities adopting it. And I think that's probably the biggest push for editors to use the cloud.
One of the things that we're seeing right now is that big visual effects companies right now are looking at people. They're just used to everybody working in the cloud. And once they got to that, they were like, well, we can send the work anywhere. Now that they can, and but what they're looking for is latency. latency becomes the issue at that point. So so we're testing in places, we have a media school in Rwanda, so we're testing Rwandans, the Rwandan connection to make sure that they can get to the servers. And there's a lot of one of the interesting things about the cloud also is just data security. I mean, you can screen capture something, but it used to be everything. You didn't want to send all those files out to everyone all over the place. And with the when you're just looking at an interface, there's not, if we don't give you a way to save it to your computer, it's a much more secure system actually than the hardware.
Let me give you some numbers on that because I know everyone here likes speeds and feeds and zeros and ones. The number that we like to stay under is 70 milliseconds. We find that traditional editors, not the top 1%, not the bottom 1%, but the average editor, if they're editing in an NLE, being under 70 milliseconds is kind of the latency magic number. Now, obviously, your local network, what's happening at the ISP level, what's happening in the data center. If we average all that out, if we do a ping test from our abode to where the machine is, and that's under 70, you can have a pleasurable editing experience. When you get over 70 milliseconds, that's when you start to get this doesn't feel right. Something isn't right. And that usually translates to 1,000 to 1,500 miles, give or take. Obviously, depending on, edge computing and whatnot, that it may vary a little bit. So normally that means you have to be using a data center that's on the same continent. That's one of those other general rules. If you're in Australia trying to edit off a machine in Los Angeles, will it work? Yeah. But just like the Jurassic Park quote, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Right.
And what would you say are the minimum bandwidths?
Good question. A lot of that is dependent on your screen sharing technology. Teradici is a very popular one. That's usually anywhere between 20 to 40 or 50 megabits per screen. So if you want 4 or 5 monitors, anticipate that 20 times 4 monitors, you'll have to take that into account. Now, what I like about a lot of these screen sharing protocols is if there's not a lot of pixels changing, right? Meaning your palette monitor, your bin monitor, not a lot's changing, not a lot of color in there. It's just text. The data rate on that drops, where your other screen, which has, your program monitor taking up a third of it, those are the only pixels that change, data rate goes up. So 20 to 40 per screen usually, and at least in the US, that's really easy for most home internet connections.
I'm going to ask you a religious question. We don't usually talk religion, but do you like Teradici or Parsec better?
When I was a sound, when I did post sound, there was a saying we used to have, which is, it doesn't sound better, it sounds different. Right. And Teradici and Parsec both have their own places. I like the fact that when you launch Teradici and use it, all the tech stuff is obscured. It's all below the abstraction layer, and it just works. No messing around with settings, right? When you're using Parsec, which was meant for gamers, you can tweak the hell out of it. And some people like that. Some people say, look, I want 265, not 264. Look, I want it to take up more bandwidth. The pricing models are about the same. So if I'm using a tablet, right, a Wacom tablet, those seem to work better on other protocols than others. So I hate to say it depends, but if I just want, it just works with a keyboard and mouse and I don't want to think about it, I'm going Teradici. If I want to be able to get into the guts and tweak it, then I'm probably going Parsec.
The funny thing is, it depends is probably one of the most popular answers in this group. So I think that's a good one. Next question.
And it's from Douglas Carmichael. Could you see audio music workflows migrating to the cloud as easily as video workflows have?
No. And that goes back to the aforementioned, the fact that when you're dealing with audio and you're dealing with sample level editing, right? We're talking, if you're doing 48K, 48,000 samples a second compared to, a handful of frames a second. So if any of you have done, high-end audio editing where you're notching out frequencies and you're cutting and pasting consonants into other people's dialogue and trying to do Frankenbites and things like that, you need really granular access. And the cloud right now does not offer that. Now, maybe they'll come up with some kind of caching mechanism like Pro Tools has when you're on a SAN or a NAS. But right now, editing audio in an NLE is good. Editing audio and maybe in Audition, some light editing, that's okay remotely. But when you start getting into really high-end audio, it's going to be difficult, and I wouldn't expect you to not have some frustration with it.
Next question.
And it's from George E. Kennedy here, Washington, D.C. Many colorists and editors took advantage of the Blackmagic ATEM Mini lineup to build cloud workflows by streaming their Resolve and Premiere Pro timelines for work sessions. Will companies like Blackmagic take advantage of these new processes?
Yes. Asterisk. And here's what I mean by that is, if we take a step back from looking at color, let's take a look at kind of how the companies operate. Blackmagic, one of their, I don't want to say edicts, but they don't charge subscriptions, right? You buy it once and it's yours. That doesn't jive with the cloud, because the cloud is you're paying per month, right? So the kind of methodology of paying for compute in the cloud but not paying for a subscription for software is kind of at odds with one another, and that really hasn't been worked out yet. However, if you are running it on-prem and you're then streaming it out and then it's going through a CDN or a direct connect, yes, that can be done, but we're still stuck with the aforementioned codec and bandwidth restraints. You're still going to be dealing with, NDI at best, right? 422. I take that back. I think you can do. I think you can do 444 HD and 422 UHD if memory serves with NDI. I think that's the commercial implementation of it. But you're still slamming it down to what? 100 megabits, right? Isn't that the upper limit for NDI right now? So you're going to be dealing with a compressed image regardless. Now, if you can handle that and you're okay with that, color all day long, no problem. But when you are getting into really high-end workflows where you need to have better than 100 megabit quality, then another solution has to come up, and that usually involves controlling a remote session that has the media playing locally on that system, or you got to fly in and do it in person.
George, you want to add anything to that?
So thanks for those answers. So obviously, we're seeing that in Final Cut Pro and Premiere Pro, at least I know those two have NDI out. So why is that there, and how is that workflow in the future where we have NDI bridge now could take you further with NDI across the globe? Also, obviously, the ATEM Minis played a big part. We're in Zoom right now, so that's where the ATEM Minis played a big part, is being able to push that out and then drop it into Zoom for their sessions. So how does NDI play a big role in the future? It's there now in the apps, but is it going to be used?
What I love is that, first of all, the NDI coming out of things like Premiere and Final Cut isn't a screen grab. It's not a screen scrape, right? You do a screen scrape, you lose all color fidelity and color management. If you're running directly out of the timeline, that's the holy grail, because then you're getting the pristine image that's being managed by the NLE, and you're controlling that. The also great thing about NDI is that you can flip it in software to anything else. So it could be a WebRTC stream. So you can send that low latency to a web browser and have someone view it in real time. So that's kind of the flexibility of NDI that I love that multiple applications are supporting. Avid even supports it, which is pretty cool. When we talk about live broadcast and running into Zoom, that's good. But as we all know, Zoom isn't giving you 30 frames guaranteed, right? The quality can compress, the audio can compress. So a lot of the clients I see that use Zoom are the ones that are watching the budget. We normally find folks who are doing higher end color grades are using Streambox or some of the other solutions that rely on higher bandwidth and higher video fidelity than using a product like Zoom.
Next question.
And a question goes across the pond to Alex 4D Gollner in London, UK. Michael, you recently attended the HPA Tech Retreat. From your discussions there, what are HPA members predicting editing and posting like in 3 and 5, 10 years down the road?
That's a great question. And Alex and I talk tech online quite a bit. We have just enough differences between us that it makes for an interesting conversation. For those who don't know HPA is the Hollywood Professional Association. I believe it's been renamed. It used to be partnered with SMPTE, and it's a retreat that hundreds of people go to, and it's talking to the VPs of technology, the SVPs of technology, the shall we say, a C level of the technical and management layer within the media and entertainment arena. So it's just the best of the best in terms of people to meet and talk to and where's the industry going. The reason I bring that up is HPA still needs to make money to rent out the resort to do this, right? And marketing, right? So a lot of the people that talk at HPA have amazing technology, but it's half sales pitch. Right. And I don't want to knock that because we all have to put food on the table. But the reason I bring that up is there wasn't a lot of people at HPA this year saying, here's where we're going to be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Now, for those of you who haven't read, who aren't familiar with Movie Labs, I highly recommend you Google that. They released a paper before the pandemic called, Hollywood in 2030. And Movie Labs is a consortium of all of the studios. All the studios got together and said, where do we want to be in at that point, 12 years? Where do we want to edit? How do we want naming conventions to be down to the granular level, how we envision Hollywood working in 12 years? And obviously the pandemic accelerated that. But the reason I bring that up is the other people who spoke at HPA, most notably Michael Cioni, right now of Adobe and Frame, is that he actually had a timeline on the screen. And his timeline said that, and I have some notes here, that when we're talking about editing in the cloud, you got to get content to the cloud first. And if you can get content from the camera to the cloud, that makes it a lot easier. If you're offloading to a mag or a hard drive, okay, you can work locally in some respects. So why not get it to the cloud first so you don't have to localize everything? And so he was prognosticating that by 2026, we're going to start to see a majority of cameras create proxies internally and beam them automatically to the cloud. And then you can do a traditional, and no pun intended, offline online workflow where you're editing with proxies and then reconforming to high res later. He also said that by 2028, we're going to see that high res is going to be able to upload to the cloud as well. So you can work with both. And then by 2031, cameras won't have removable media anymore. Everything will be automatically to the cloud, and then you can edit with it in the cloud. I think that's a little ambitious. I think when we work with Hollywood, who has the budget to get new cameras and have the pipes, can afford the cloud every month, that may be plausible. But I think for a majority of freelance editors, majority of small productions, I think we're a good 12, 15 years away at this point from having everything up to the cloud automatically. I think the other angle to that is we're already seeing audio already beamed to the cloud, right? Because that's low payload, very easy to do. I think we're also seeing a lot of students that's what they're learning. Right? Their camera is buying less expensive JVC cameras that have been beaming to the cloud for years. And so they're coming out of their education, their scholastic, their schools, and they're used to it. They're used to using the cloud. They don't know what editing on-prem is. They don't know what frames are, right? Because they've never had a razor blade. So I think as the younger generation is growing up and understands this paradigm of working in the cloud, that's going to take over.
Next question.
And it's from Jason Panks of Nashville, Tennessee. What are some of the software tools you use, Michael?
Software tools, I presume in the cloud, I'm guessing. Bebop, we've built our own platform. Bebop ties into the APIs provided by AWS, GCP, and Azure. And then we have our own code that do things like auto mount storage and assign drive letters and permissions and review and approve and that kind of thing. If we take a step back, one of the most magical pieces of software I've come across in the past decade is LucidLink. And I'm sure it's been discussed here. LucidLink, I don't want to belittle or minimize their technology, but what it does in a sentence is it caches the frame that your local machine is asking for locally. So every time you go back to that frame, it plays it locally and doesn't have to pull it from the cloud. That allows you to play high bandwidth, high bitrate files without localizing that file first. So the media is sitting on the cloud, you request that frame in the background and it drops in your NLE and you see that entire file. It's fantastic, it's inexpensive, and I hope more people start using it, because relying on Dropbox or Google Drive for collaboration in a synchronous way is just not great. So LucidLink is probably one of the biggest ones. Also, as George mentioned or brought up, integrating NDI wherever possible, because that's the way you're getting these high-end streams. If you're looking for screen sharing protocols, I know we talked a little bit about Parsec, Alex. We talked a little bit about Teradici. Jump Desktop is also another fantastic screen sharing solution.
And what makes it different from the other two?
Jump, if I'm not mistaken, is browser-based. If someone can correct me on that, I may be incorrect on that, but I believe that makes it a little bit easier for it to be cross-platform than Teradici, who until this year was only PC-based, and Parsec, which until this year was only PC-based as a host.
Next question.
And it's from George Kennedy, and he says, what are the benefits of using Bebop versus building out your post workflow on AWS or Azure?
I can answer that, but can I also show you it?
Yeah, absolutely. Just go ahead.
Can I do that?
Share screen. Yep.
Yep. Host is disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh, we just need to make Michael a co-host.
But that's a great question. And one of the main things is that, and I don't want to say it's easy, but almost anyone can jump into AWS and say, I want to spin up a workstation, pay this much per hour, and then attach storage to it and edit, right? But that's an island. That's like saying your edit bay, all you need is a machine and a keyboard. No, you need a lot more than that, right? You need ways to collaborate. You need ways to bring people on to work with. So let me share my screen. Still disabled.
Yeah, we have to have someone on the back end. Hopefully is listening.
No problem. No problem.
Taking a little too long.
So what we find, George, is it's the collaboration features. And I know that collaboration is one of those just buzzwords, but there's no other way of really describing it. If, George, you're editing something and you want to show it to someone else on the other side of the world, sure, you can work with NDI on the VM and then send that, make sure they have enough bandwidth and pipe an NDI stream to them. Or what if I were to put that in a web browser and add bidirectional audio? Right now you have synchronous review and approve between someone else. What if you're working in the cloud and you need to work on the same content with someone else? Well, when you're in the cloud, normally you attach storage to a workstation. It's not shared with everyone. Okay, so Bebop provides fast shared storage that allows you to collaborate and edit the same content with other people at the same time. We also don't want people to have to learn how to build an erector set. Right? If you have to build it yourself, I mean, would you rather buy a house or build a house? I'd rather buy a house. And when you say, look, go and build something on AWS, that's with all these collaboration features, that's a Herculean effort. If I can just say, look, I give you a couple $100 a month and it just works, I can onboard freelancers and they don't need weeks and weeks of training. Still can't share.
We're just having some kind of permissions there.
No problem.
We're working on it.
No problem. I'm anxious to show you this.
We'll come back. We'll come back to this question. We're going to jump to the next question. We'll come back to it later.
Cool. All right, let's go to Courtney Gooden in Hollywood, California, asking if running your editing software in the cloud, how does latency affect things like scrubbing or trying to find a specific frame to cut on? Great
question. And you have to kind of understand kind of the back end of how this works with a lot of these protocols. A lot of the screen sharing protocols are grabbing a video frame and audio frame and sending it to your local system, but they're not combined, meaning they arrive at your system separately. And then there has to be some magic done in the background to realign those. And as you pointed out, that can cause some issue. Hey, why do I have lip flap? Well, it's because you're 1,000 miles away from the data center. It's not because your stuff is out of sync. So what we've done is, we make sure that everyone is under 70 milliseconds if possible. We triage or work with people on their home network connections, get an Ethernet cable. If you can get a better router and set some QoS rules. So your screen sharing protocol has the primary access through the router. What we also do is we have recommended settings for the NLEs. So for example, if you're using Premiere in the cloud, a lot of times you want to go into your preferences audio hardware and set your latency to 60 milliseconds as opposed to 200, which is the default. And then we do what we call season to taste, where you see if that is in sync. We also include a nice bouncing ball every second, kind of like a countdown that has a 2-pop that allows you to play and then see, well, is that in sync? No. Okay, I need to back that off. And then we find editors, it takes about a day or so for them to get accustomed to it. But once they turn on waveforms, once they get the latency issue rectified so things are in sync, they kind of fall into it like a warm glove. But there does have to be some mitigation of that latency, both on the workstation in the cloud as well as your local system.
Let's go ahead and go back to that question and see if you can't show us how Bebop works.
Yes, I can. There we go. All right. Can everyone see my screen? I'm sure you hear that on every call. This is a workstation in the cloud. This is 400 miles north of me. I'm on a Mac system locally, but this is a workstation in GCP in San Jose, so 400 miles north of me. And obviously, all I have to do if I want to launch an application is to click on it, launch it, and use it. But that's really easy, right? I have Premiere running right here. That's not difficult at all. And I have my audio turned down, so you're not hearing me twice. But this is the kind of two-pop video I told you about, where you could play it and you hear the beep, and that allows you to kind of go into your audio preferences and then audio hardware, and then adjust your latency. But again, editing in the cloud, just loading a workstation and storage, that's pretty easy. What I want to show you are things like our receive links. Like, for example, everyone on the call today, if I want to edit content that you have, how do I get it? Are all of you doing a WeTransfer? Am I setting up an archaic FTP site and having you all use FTP? Do I have to work with email attachments? Or can I generate something like a receive link that allows me to create a web link that all of you can use to upload media? And let me illustrate that for you, because that was kind of a boring description. I'm going to go back to my local machine right now, which is my MacBook Pro. And I would like all of you to scan this QR code. Hopefully all of you can see that. This will get you to a web page where you can upload content to edit on Bebop that I'll get immediately. This won't have to go through a third-party FTP site. It goes directly to your edit storage. I'd prefer you upload something and keep it clean. But if you could use your phone and upload audio, video, still, and you'll see just how quickly we can edit that. I can't see everyone else on the call. Is that QR code large enough for people to see?
Yeah, it totally works.
Great. So I'll leave it up for a few more seconds. You'll see on my right-hand side, you can see my desktop in the background, right? My VM desktop in the background. And on the right-hand side is a folder, and that folder will automatically populate as soon as someone uploads media. And then that media I can open in any application I want. So if you want to upload a PSD, great. I can load that into PSD, into Photoshop. If you're dropping in an MOV, I can put that into Premiere. So it looks like we have at least one file that's already been uploaded. There we go. Looks like someone's Jeep Gen Cherokee. I'm now going to go down to Premiere, which I've already running in the background. I'm going to see the file right here, and I can just drag that in and begin editing. So that allows folks to work up. It looks like there's some more. Did someone really upload Big Buck Bunny? That's hysterical. Because I think everyone in the industry knows Big Buck Bunny is a high quality open source video we can use for demos. So I get a kick out of that, whoever uploaded that file.
And it's, unfortunately, most people when testing don't watch the whole thing. And then they don't realize that it's really dark. Like it's really like there was like I had a client I didn't do it because I won't play Big Buck Bunny on any of my shows anymore. But someone else was posting it through, and I had the client on the comms, and they were just like, "What are we watching? This is very twisted."
What I also find funny is people try and use it for sync. It's animation. It's on the twos. Good luck with that. You know.
Yeah. Is that like being Rickrolled?
Yes, yeah, exactly. It's very meta because we use it at Bebop quite a bit. But George, there's something else I wanted to show you because you were talking about this a moment ago. So I'm in my timeline in Premiere right now, and if I go back to my local web browser, I have my web browser right here. And if I go into Premiere, hit play, you'll see that I'm playing directly out of my timeline into a web browser. Right? So this allows me to view it in real time with the editor. I then can join a jam session, which is what we call our audio portion. And this allows me to talk back and forth with everyone who's on the call. So this gives you real-time review and approve in a web browser without people having to learn new technology. So this was kind of my holy grail when I came to Bebop. I said, I want to be able to play out in real time to a web browser. How can we do that? And here we are. So, I guess what I'm getting at, George, is these things aren't available on AWS. These things aren't available on Azure or Google. AWS uses something called Workspaces. They also bought a company about 3 years ago called Nimble Collective that focuses more on VFX. But a lot of those tools are meant for I'm working on an island, or I'm working with other people on an island, and I don't have collaboration tools. And that's something that Bebop builds in with our complete deployment.
That's great. Let's jump to, that's great. Great. Looks like a killer service. So I'm really excited. What's the kind of, how do people pay for it? What's the price? What's the business model there?
Oh yeah. And that's, every demo I do, and I do demos all day, every day. And that's always the point I hate coming to. Because, with 5 things, I like to be completely straightforward. So here's your kind of back of the napkin math. If you want to use a workstation that is powerful enough to do what you need to, we were talking 16 cores, 100 gigs of RAM, 16 gig GPU because you want a dedicated GPU, not one that's shared because of crosstalk. You're looking at between $2 and $2.50 an hour. So you multiply that over a month, right? About 170 hours. $2 an hour, that's $340, right? There are companies out there that claim they do it cheaper. They're using machines in other geographies around the world where the costs are cheaper, or you're in a shared environment. But if you want to use AWS, GCP, Azure, you're looking at about $2.50, $2 to $2.50 per hour per workstation. You're also looking at $100 to $150 per terabyte for storage.
Right.
Then we start adding on all the other things, meaning what's egress, which scares people, right? Egress is usually $75 to $100 per terabyte per month. You're also looking at your software license, right? Adobe or Teradici or Parsec or Jump. So it's going to be several $100s per user per month. The way Bebop works is we realized long ago that we don't want to resell the cloud. Right? That's complicated. No one wants to get in that. There's no money there. So what we traditionally do is say, George, Alex, we'll build this on your AWS account. So you can march in or maybe zoom in to the AWS office and say, look, I want better pricing. Give me better pricing. And then you get that. You don't have to go through us. So we build on your AWS account, your GCP, your Azure account. You pay the raw costs, and then you pay per head per month to Bebop, which is usually $200, $250 per user per month.
Right.
And our service obviously makes the erector set work. We add things like SSO and security, back-end metrics on usage. We have our own transfer tool called Rocket, so you don't need a Spera or Signient. So we all add a lot of these other things in there. But you should probably expect, if you're using Bebop, that you're going to be paying anywhere between $500 and $800 a month per user.
Right.
But again, if you want to build it yourself in the cloud, you can, but it's going to be very much islands of individual users, and collaboration is going to have to be filled by third parties. And those third party costs like Frame.io and the screen sharing protocols and whatnot, once you start tacking those on per month, you're going to get up to that $500, $800 per month very quickly.
Next question.
Yeah, I got a question for you, Michael. Is that a mood light behind you, or you just got a kind of a mood does cloud production put you into?
Well, if I can share my screen again, since we're all geeks here, I think you all will appreciate this. Let's see, I have a home automation system, and my office, I can cycle my colors every 10 seconds or 5 seconds or 3 seconds. I can control my webcam light. I can take a look at all my different cameras and stuff. So no, it's just makes it a little bit more interesting than a static light behind me.
Very good. Next question. Next question.
I think you're muted, Mitchell.
The button has to be pushed, doesn't it? Courtney Gooden has his question from Hollywood, California. How is IP security handled if people can access these highly secretive content from remote locations?
Excellent question. And one of the factors that Bebop always takes into account when we deploy is what we call the security gauntlet, because there's always going to be InfoSec reviews and audits. So number of things. First of all, pen testing, right? Penetration testing. We also mandate that everyone who uses Bebop has to subscribe or has to be part of an SSO methodology, so single sign-on. We also do two-factor authentication, so that goes to your cell phone, not your email. The protocols we use have 128 or 256-bit AES encryption. Each of the cloud providers also can do what they call EAR, or encryption at rest, which means even when no one's accessing that media, it's encrypted. Bebop also puts in proxy servers in line. So if a administrator says, you can access Envato elements to download stuff, but we're not giving you access to YouTube, they can have an allow list or deny list of IPs and domains and URLs. We also can put watermarks. If you saw the video I was showing a few minutes ago, there was a watermark at the bottom right. So we can put watermarks on every outgoing stream, so you know exactly who's doing it and why. Also, if you use our transfer tool, we track who uploads what and who downloads what, and if it was successful. So if a file leaks out, we know who downloaded it and who we have to revoke access to.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, does that additional security protocol add any to the latency?
Nope. The protocols like Parsec and Jump and Teradici have that factored in. Encryption at rest, we did extensive testing in the cloud because we thought it may increase latency from the shared storage to the VM. But no, we found no noticeable lag in that whatsoever.
Our next question.
From Jason Panks in Nashville, Tennessee. Any preferences for AWS versus GCP versus Azure?
I get that a lot. And a couple things. First of all, we need to look at the kind of workstations you want, right? The workstation has to be available in a region near you. So that's going to limit the playing field right there, because the data center may not be in your arena or near you. They also may not have the workstations you want. You may say, look, I want an AMD processor, not an Intel. Okay, that's going to filter out some of the data centers. Also, you may want ones that have certain GPUs, because certain software applications work better with certain GPUs. So that's going to filter it out. I find that a majority of people are using AWS. I bring that up not because I think it's the best. I bring it up because it's been around the longest. And everyone knows the immense amount of microservices AWS has. They've been out there pushing it a lot more than others. Azure, we don't see used as much, but I find that very interesting because Azure is the only cloud that Avid uses, for example. If you want to edit with Media Composer and have a shared Nexus file system, you have to use Azure. I do see, however, GCP coming up very fast and being very hungry. And so I see them doing some really amazing things with pricing and technology. So I can't say I choose one over another, but we normally see AWS and GCP as the deployment, as the primary places we're deploying.
Next question.
And it's from Robert Shoji in Los Angeles, California. He has a basic question. I think he's referring to a ProRes file, but can a 422 HQ file be accurately transferred via Google Drive?
Well, you can certainly use Google Drive as an intermediary and to put the media from your local system to synced to Google Storage and then have someone else access that. If we're talking about LucidLink, sure, yeah, if you were to upload a ProRes 422 file into LucidLink and then that's in the cloud and then you're on-prem, yeah, you can certainly pull that frame and play it without much issue. If we're talking about utilizing Bebop, Bebop mounts EBS. If we're talking AWS, it mounts EBS storage, so block storage. So we're talking 200 to 300 megabytes a second per user. So if you want to do ProRes multicam, no issue. If you want to do some red files, no issue. We normally don't mount object storage, which is slower storage, directly to the VMs, because with object storage, as you probably know, it breaks up a file into a million tiny pieces, and trying to recombine that on the fly and edit is no bueno. It's not a fun experience. So we mount the block storage, but to edit off of. But if we bring up LucidLink again, we can mount a LucidLink workspace to the VM and edit directly off that LucidLink workspace. And that will give you decreased throughput, but decreased cost on the object storage as well. Bebop also has our own kind of object storage magic we call Flex, which gives you some of the same performance. So we normally don't edit directly off object storage just because of latency issues.
Next question.
Andy Garland from Los Angeles, California. Can you share an example of the most impressive end-to-end or as close as possible cloud-based workflow you have seen out there?
Well, hi, Andy. Looking forward to drinks next week. I'd have to say Bebop. I hate to say that, but and this is not me, being the Pied Piper for Bebop, but I kid you not, I was on a call yesterday with an educator who said, we want to move things to the cloud. We tried to build our own system, didn't work. I looked on the web, I talked to our other technical folks here, and we can't find anything that does everything that you do. So I have to say Bebop, because all the other providers out there seem to say, look, we'll allow you to spin up a workstation and we'll give you storage. That's it. And that's great for a one-off. That's great for a freelancer. But having that facility environment, that collaborative environment, just isn't found anywhere else unless you're tacking on third-party products. And that just becomes unwieldy from a cost perspective and the fact that there's no integration between them all.
Next question.
And it's from Robert Shoji in Los Angeles. Can Michael comment on the basic things a remote collaborator can do to their internet connection to reduce latency, increase speed, and ensure a consistent and reliable connection?
Great question. In fact, I wrote a little mini ebook on this, and I'll try and get that to Alex to see if there's a way we can provide that to everybody. But a couple things. First off, always be wired. Your home connection, wired to your machine, right? Don't go wireless. Get a router that has QoS, or quality of service. And you want to make sure to set your quality of service to whatever protocol you're using, whether it be Teradici, which is PC over IP, or QoS based on the IP address of your machine. For any people who run facilities here, think of your wireless connection, or your remote connection. Think of that like you would a voice over IP system. Think of it that way. You want to segment everything onto that VLAN because that's going to give you the best performance. You also, and I know none of you want to do this, I guarantee you none of you want to do this, shut down Dropbox, shut down Adobe Creative Cloud in the background, shut down Pandora, shut down Spotify, shut down Aspera, shut down Signiant. Stop all the things that are on your local system that are talking to the web. Shut those down, because that's going to take up your bandwidth and can cause issues. Most protocols are not error correcting. So that means that if you drop a packet, you drop a packet, right? But that's how you get low latency. So the more things you have running on your system that are talking to the web, the more noise is going to be on the line. If you can, with your child or with your partner, if they're watching Netflix or gaming, have them stop if at all possible. If they're using Zoom, have them turn their camera off. But as a coworker of mine likes to say, your internet connection is your lifeline to a paycheck. So right, if that doesn't help set the bar for or set the standard for where your internet connection needs to lie, I think that does. So I hope that helps. And like I said, I'll try and get Alex that document for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And when during the pandemic, it's a little bit more relaxed now, but during the pandemic, we had two, the family had one connection and I had another. It was a completely separate connection to make sure that they could do whatever they needed to do and I could continue to work, because it was at the time we couldn't do anything else. Next question.
And a good follow-up question from Douglas Carmichael. What speed of home internet connection would you recommend for effective cloud workflows? Currently, I have 50 megabits per second down, and this would be for my mom streaming Netflix. Am I working remotely full-time?
50 down is tough. I would probably suggest that you get at least 100 down. The protocols that we normally look at are 20 to 40 or 50 megabits per HD screen plus overhead. So I'd go for at least 100. We just got fiber where I live 2 months ago, so I don't deal with that. But I would highly recommend that you get at least 100 down. And a lot of times, if you work for a company or for a facility, you can ask for, I don't say per diem, but reimbursement for your internet connection and apply that to your to getting a larger plan at your house.
Last question.
And it's from Douglas Carmichael. What home router and access point would you recommend? Currently have a Juniper SRX 110 router and a EX22000C gigabit switch, along with a Zyxel 802.11n access point.
Well, as George and I talked a little bit online a couple of months ago, we bought a house a couple of months ago, our first house, and I put in a unified system. So everything is outfitted with that, and I've got Cat 6A run to every room in the house. So I obviously would recommend that. That being said, I was using a Netgear Blackhawk router for the first year in the pandemic, and I can set QoS rules on that, and that worked just fine in a wired capacity to access machines in the cloud.
Michael, thank you so much for your time. It's
This has been so much fun. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for all your great questions. Feel free to look me up online, and we'll talk tech.
What's your handle on Twitter?
At Michael Kammes.
That's easy.
Just pronouncing it, that's the issue.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
I saying it wrong the whole week, and then you finally looked at one, and you're like, "Whoa!" And so anyways, it was good. It was good. I'm glad we got that sorted out. Yeah, exactly. So thank you so much. Hopefully, we'll get you back. Have you come back every once in a while and jump in and join us on some of the conversations. It's really just such a pleasure to have you.
I'd love to, and there's plenty of other tech I can pontificate on. So thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thanks so much. All right. Thank you to our producers. Fantastic questions, both in the first hour and the second hour. Really, really well done. And thanks to our panelists. We can't do this without you. We really appreciate it. And we remember that we have the rocket launch tomorrow. So we'll have the first hour, and we're all going to go into after hours, and we're going to watch this rocket and see if it survives the ascent. So anyway, should be a lot of fun. That's at 8:00 is when the coverage starts. 9:00 is when the actual rocket will take off. All right, we'll now jump into after hours. This is the part we wait for the credits to come up. Oh, we see the credits. We don't know if anyone can hear us, but we're going to go now. Bye-bye.